Welcome back. Now we are in Tactical Edge again. Welcome to our big event. Good morning. We have some special people here with us today. Ed, how are you? How are you today?
Oh, I'm doing fantastic, Salma. Thank you very much. Yeah, we have great speakers today. We're going to start the day with Wendy Nather, and we have Stephen Moore from Exabeam, followed by Elizabeth Wharton from Scythe, and Dr. Pablo Brewer, who is already in another company. So we'll let him tell us later when he shows up at 3 p.m. the afternoon session. But welcome everyone. Thank you for being with us one more time, one more day on Tactical Edge Virtual Summit. Before we begin, we have a special guest, Charles Shearer, perfect. Charles, you can find him on Twitter, and I've been watching his videos every morning, and he agreed to be with us to start this with the way that Tactical Edge is supposed to start. So welcome, Charles. Thank you very much for being here.
Oh, well, thank you for having me. And again, I'm super excited. And we're going to declare today Tactical Tuesday in honor of Tactical Edge.
Beautiful.
So let's rock out and enjoy and have some fun and learn something.
Let's do it.
Of course, we need those good vibes, Charles. Thank you for being with us, though. We are waiting how we're going to wake up today with all those big energy.
Well, here we are. Let's do this.
Let's go.
Yeah. All right, it froze on me for a second there.
Okay.
So, all right, so here we go. Again, it's Tactical Tuesday, everyone. From a Tactical Edge perspective, I just want to say that I love you all. Let's rock out and enjoy the day. Don't forget to have fun, check on each other, and help each other. This is what we do. Let greatness precede you, and let your awesomeness shine. Ow!
Ow! Woo! All right, thank you, Charles. This is fantastic. I'm getting all excited and getting ready to rock and roll. So, Charles, really appreciate you being here, buddy. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope that you enjoy the event, and I'll count with you participation in future events, future Tactical Edge events. So, everyone, Tactical Tuesday today. So we'll start with Wendy Nather. If you notice, Salma and Wendy are having the battle of the Colombian sombreros.
Really, I have this Colombian typical hat, de volteado sombrero, as it just said, but it's in honor of Wendy, of course, because we know that Wendy loves hats and she has this fabulous hat today. Tell us, Wendy, the story about your hat, please.
The story of my hat.
Yeah.
Well, I was at Tactical Edge in Cartagena last year, and Ed, being the wonderful host that he is, took us shopping in the old city and in this little shop, and I just saw this beautiful green hat, and it's like the green of Duo Security where I work, and I thought that this is the one for me. And of course, now it's perfect because it hides my pandemic hair, which has grown out quite a lot. And, it's, what can I say? It's a part of me now. So it's one of my best memories of Colombia.
And one of your favorite hats too, because you have a big collection of hats, no?
Yes, I do. I do. And I especially needed them when I was going through chemo and I had no hair. Let me tell you, it is cold when you don't have hair. So I collected a lot of different hats, but yeah, this one is my favorite now.
Charles knows everything about it.
Charles knows what I'm talking about.
Yes, I do.
Wendy and Edgar also told me that you have been in Colombia for few times. You went to Bogota, Cartagena, Cali.
That's right. That's right. And somewhere there is a video of me dancing salsa with Ed. It must have been after a lot of wine. I don't really remember.
Oh, yeah, there's a
Okay.
video salsa dancing, and also our good friend Andy Ellis, who will be with us tomorrow. Also, some photos of him doing some salsa moves in Cali during
Mhm.
the
You have
all
good
security zone.
memories, really good memories.
Yes, yes. Ed can talk me into anything.
Oh, okay. All right. So
Be nice. Be nice.
I am Latin, so you know it's. But
Uh-huh,
anyway, Salma. So what's Wendy's presentation? Tell us
Well,
about Wendy.
thank you so much for being with us, Charles, Wendy. Wendy, you're amazing. Thank you so much. Wendy is head of the advisory CISO team at Do Security Now Cisco, and she's our first speaker of the day. So tell us, Wendy, what are you talking about today? Where is your presentation?
My presentation is right here. I'm going to be talking about time and risk dimensions in security. So see if you can figure out what we're doing here. Now, this topic came about as kind of a challenge from Ryan Narain, if you know him. He's at Intel. And he said he wanted me to talk about cybersecurity's relationship with time. And I thought, wow, that is mind-blowing. And I would love to explore this with you. So here we go. Fasten your seatbelts. Let's start with once upon a time, there was a computer. Remember, there was one computer, and it was a mainframe, and it operated at a certain speed because when you programmed it, you had to make punch cards and you had to schedule the time, your particular time on that computer, and the operator had to run the program for you and collect the output and give it back to you. And so everything ran at a certain speed, which, you know, was pretty manageable. But now, of course, we have millions upon millions upon millions of computers of all kinds, and many of them running independently. And our time horizons have grown and they've splintered. So reactions, attacks, automated responses take milliseconds. But we have, when there's a human involved in the reaction, as Charles knows, that happens at human speed, which is a lot slower. If you are trying to respond to an incident and it involves changing things, for example, we find out our server is an SMTP relay and we got to fix that, but first we got to go through the change control board and get them to turn that off. That can take days or weeks. It can take months to put in a new measure, to put in new technology. One time when I was working for a Texas state agency, it took, and I'm not kidding you, 9 months to procure and spin up a new VM instance. 9 months. And the server was already there, but between the procurement procedures and change control and bureaucracy of my agency, the company that we were working with, it took 9 months to get a VM instance. So you know, if you're at an organization, how these things can take a really long time. And then of course, innovation can take years. You can't put a schedule on innovation. It happens when it happens. And the thing is, you're trying to look ahead and figure out what's going to happen by the time you're done innovating. And so we are dealing with all these different time horizons now when it comes to cybersecurity. So first of all, we're unable to react in the appropriate time span in a lot of cases. And we're overdriving our headlights quite a bit because we can't really see into the future, and yet we're having to plan as if we could because it takes us so long to get where we're going. So what are we going to try to do about it? In this talk, I'm going to try to figure out how to react better, how to plan better, and because I like mushing things up together, how to plan to react better. So let's play with time, shall we? Let's play with the timey-wimey stuff. I'm going to have fun with this. I've got my little sonic screwdriver here. I am all ready to go. Let's play with time. How do we react better? Or in other words, how do we use time to our advantage in cybersecurity? I want to start with a model by a gentleman named Sunil Yu, who is one of the smartest people I know. He gave a great talk at RSA called New Paradigms for the Next Era of Security. He also created the cyber defense matrix, if you've ever seen that. I believe I talked about that at Tactical Edge in Cartagena last year, which is a matrix through which you can look at the different security technologies and controls that you're using. So his newest model he describes as distributed, immutable, and ephemeral. And that spells DIE, and I'm not really sure I like proposing a model that stands for die, but anyway, let's move on. He describes it in different ways. First of all, the cyber defense matrix that he created follows the NIST categories of identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And he points out that over time as an industry, we have been kind of going through those phases ourselves in terms of the technology and the innovations that we've uncovered. So in the 80s, it was about identifying what we have. In the 90s, we were focusing a lot on protection, antivirus and firewalls and things like that. In the early 2000s, we moved on to detection. We started really focusing on whether we could detect things better, anomaly detection and everything like that. In the last decade, we moved on to respond, and you saw a lot more technologies around automated response and coordinated response, threat hunting, which I know Charles is totally into. And now he's proposing that in the 2020s, in this decade, we are going to be focusing on recovery. And to this purpose, he's proposing these three qualities for technology: that it should be distributed. Think about containers, think about microservices that are spread everywhere. If they are widely distributed, this makes them more resistant to DDoS attacks. And it also means, of course, higher availability. So if you think about the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, he argues that you don't need to worry about availability as much anymore if you are distributed enough. Next is immutable. If you make systems that are not designed to be changed at all, you don't log in, you don't reconfigure them, you don't change them. They're simply, stamped with a gold image, and if they change at all, you know immediately that that's a bad change because they're not supposed to change at all. So what you just do is swap it out. You replace it immediately because they are not designed to be changed. This can lead to higher integrity because, by definition, any change is a bad change. But I'm most interested in the final one, which is ephemerality. Having something live intentionally for a very short time, not keeping it around. If you think back in the 90s and 2000s, when we had especially firewalls that hadn't been rebooted in years, and everybody was afraid to reboot them because you didn't know what was going to happen. You didn't know if they would come back up. This is the opposite of that. They are intentionally designed to live for a short time and be replaced by a duplicate, to be updated, to have continuous integration. You see this all the time in companies like Netflix, where they're doing, updates all the time. They're always overwriting what they have. Now, Sunil argues that this drives the value of the assets on these types of systems closer to zero, because if an attacker gets a foothold, it doesn't last very long because it gets overwritten immediately. And this will then protect against attacker persistence. Now, let me just give you a caveat here. Sunil is so smart that it takes me a long time to digest what he proposes. I'm still not sure I buy everything that he's proposing here, but I think it is interesting enough and certainly worth talking about. So let's continue and explore this and see what some examples are for cybersecurity. Sunil describes two different ways of treating the systems under your control, like pets and like cattle. If you have a system that is a pet, you give it a pronounceable name. You know, we give our pets pronounceable names. We're talking to them all the time. If a pet gets sick, you take it to the veterinarian, you do everything you can to make it well again, and you indulge their idiosyncrasies. For example, when I was making this talk, I was sitting at my desk, and one of my cats always takes that as a cue that if I'm sitting at my desk, she can climb into my lap and go to sleep in my arms, and that means I can't actually do any work. And I indulge that because she's my pet. What does that look like for a system? Well, first of all, you're going to give it a quirky name, you know, a pronounceable one. This is an actual host name from when I was a system administrator at a Swiss bank in the 90s. Our source code server was called Fine, so that if there was a network problem or an NFS problem, you would see the error message, NFS server fine, not responding. NFS server fine, okay. We thought this was hilarious. What can I say? It was the 90s. I think we also had a backup server called Good, NFS server good, not responding. And you can see, you know, where that goes. I would have loved to have had a server called Totally. But anyway, these are quirky names. These are pet names. You only have one of these servers, and if something is wrong, you log into it. You try to fix whatever it is, because you've only got the one and you take very good care of it. Now, cattle, on the other hand, or sheep or any other kind of animal that you herd in large quantities and that you raise, are given a designation. They're not given a name. This is cow number 586. I don't know, look at the tag on the ear. I don't know, you know, it doesn't have a name. Once when I was a kid, I had 17 tree frogs all named Kermit. So you can kind of argue that Kermit wasn't really a name, it was a designation, because, you know, if I lost one, it didn't matter. I don't know, one of the Kermits went, I don't know which one. They're all named Kermit. If it's cattle, if they're sick, you know, you take them someplace and sell them, or, you know, you turn them right into a steak, whatever. There are no exceptions. Now, I was driving along a highway here in Austin the other day, and I came across the Texas Beef Council, which I guess is the organization that promotes, you know, the eating and selling of beef, hamburgers, steaks, whatever. And right next door, there was a veterinarian. And I thought, oh my God, that is awful. You know, because can you imagine me taking a sick cow to the vet there and saying, you know, Ms. Nather, we're sorry, your cow's not going to make it. But the good news is we're going to take your cow right next door and we'll have a check cut for you in just a few minutes. Wow. So these sorts of systems are sacrificial on purpose. You know, they have a designation. And what this looked like later on, as we got more and more servers at this bank, we gave them designations. Look at this. LDN1, that stands for, you know, London 1, site number 1 in London, P13, production server number 13, SYB, yes, that stands for Sybase, that's how old this is, and so on. But that's really hard to talk to somebody about. We got to log into LDN1P, you know, somebody's in a data center and it's really loud and you're on the phone with them and saying, log into that one. So sometimes we would give them aliases because they were a little bit more pronounceable, like Squiggy. But if you start calling them pronounceable names like this, these nicknames, you know you're turning them back into pets. Oh, Squiggy is you know, slowing down again. Can you log in and figure out what's going on? Can you change something? Can you fix something? It's turning it back into a pet. So what do you do instead? What we did was we created, again, designations as aliases, which were a little bit more pronounceable, London side backup. But we put this in NIS so that anytime we had to change out the servers on the other side, the developers didn't have to change the hard-coded host names in the code. All they had to do was code for London side backup, and we would make any changes in NIS anytime we had a server go down or we had to replace it with a different one and so on. We built in a pivot spot, which was easy for us to change quickly, to use time to our advantage. And again, this was 25 years ago-ish. So we were already doing this sort of thing to make way for the idea of servers as cattle, as replaceable, as designations. So what Sunil recommends is that you try to make sure that you have more cattle than pets in your infrastructure. Now, for things like databases where you have to keep persistent data and you have to change it all the time, you can't just overwrite it. Yeah, those are going to have to be pets. But try to minimize those and try to have more cattle, because that makes it more defensible. If an adversary gets a foothold in cattle, you shoot it, you take it out back, you swap it out, and you make time work to your advantage when you're responding to an incident like that. Here's another example of making time work for us. In threat intelligence sharing, I'm sure you've heard people say that the defender has to be right all the time. They can't make any mistakes. If they leave any vulnerabilities, the attacker only has to be right once. And that's not fair for us defenders. But with threat intelligence sharing, that flips the script, because now if you see an attacker and you share that information immediately, now it's the attacker that has to be invisible and silent and stealthy all the time. And the defender only has to spot it once and share it everywhere. The attacker cannot afford to mess up, because as soon as the attacker is seen, it's over for them. So there's another example of making time and response work for us. I'm sure everybody knows and loves David Bianco's Pyramid of Pain. I love it myself. He talks about how many different indicators of compromise are so trivial for the attacker to change that it's almost not worth sharing those, because they are going to be rotated out. Just like the cattle we were talking about before, hash values, for example, are so trivial to change that, in fact, a lot of the malware we're seeing today is unique for every victim. So there's very little point in saying, hey, has anybody else seen this hash of a file? Because chances are nobody else has. They all got their own hashes. So we're not going to mess around as much with those. IP addresses are also pretty easy to swap through, to change. I mean, by definition, you're doing this whenever you're doing load balancing, right? For domain names, those are also pretty simple to change and auto-generate. Although I do know of researchers that are working on cracking the algorithms that attackers use to generate new domain names so that they can get ahead of the rotation and sinkhole the next upcoming set of domain names so that the attackers can't use them. So again, you have to be able to respond really quickly if you are dealing in these sorts of IOCs, because the attacker is going to be moving very quickly too. Now, if we move up the pyramid and we look at network or host artifacts, that gets more annoying for the attacker to change. If you're telling everybody to look in this folder for, a file named purple, then that's annoying, because the attacker has to go change their scripts and rename the files, maybe put them in different locations. So changing artifacts is harder and it takes them longer. So it's more useful to share those sorts of IOCs. If you go after the tools that the attacker is using directly, that's really challenging, because then they have to go find or build different tools. That takes time. That takes development time, just like it does for us. So we want to slow the attacker down by sharing things that they can't easily change. And then TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures, those are tough. The way that somebody does something, or even who they are, their legal names, where they are, where they're working, those are very difficult for the attacker to change. So if you can get those TTPs, those are the ones you want to change. You're using time to your advantage to slow down the attacker. So in summary, if we're trying to react faster, what we're trying to do is, as I used to say as a sysadmin, when in doubt, swap it out wherever you can. We want to minimize persistence for us. We want to be nimble. We want to be agile. We want to be able to swap things out whenever we can. We want to maximize persistence for the attacker. We want to share things that they can't easily change. And if you see something once, share it everywhere, wherever you can, because again, that slows them down. Now, you may have been asking yourself, we're talking about reacting faster. Why didn't Wendy mention automation? I heard you saying that. Automation is great, but in my opinion, it goes best with certainty, precision, and commitment. What do I mean by this? If you automate something, you better be certain that you always want it to do what you programmed it to do. In other words, you can't go in and say later, oh, I didn't want you to do it that way. You have to be very certain that you want the automation to respond the same way with the same conditions that you put in to begin with. Precision, you want it to do exactly what you ask it to do, but without any ripple effects on other systems. You want to be very precise in the automated response that you want to have. And commitment, you're going to have to put it in here and then let it run. You can't go in and tinker with it all the time. Then it's not automation anymore. So for some parts of incident response, yes, automation is great if you know exactly what you want to do and you can scope it properly and you can leave it and let it run. I know a lot of really good organizations that look at the responses that they have made to, when they detected something and thought, can we automate this now? Now that we know how to do it, can we automate it and leave it running so that our human hunters and analysts can focus on something else? And yes, that works great. But again, it's limited. It's not going to be for every circumstance in which you are responding. Now, by the way, I was going to come to this. This is why blockchain is not going to solve everything. Because by its very nature, blockchain is supposed to be immutable. You have to commit. You can't go in and change it if you made a mistake later. So for those of you who are blockchain fans out there, sorry, you can go fight me later on Twitter. But automation and blockchain are great, but they are only in cases where you're certain, you are committed, and you're precise in what you want to do. Next, how do we plan better? Or how do we future-proof our security? Again, because innovation takes a long time. It takes a long time to deploy new tools, new controls. Let me introduce you to Heather Vescent, who is a futurist. She gave a talk called Imagining the Future of Security, also at RSA, really good talk. She and Bob Blakely, who is at Citigroup, wrote an excellent paper on forecasting the possible futures of cybersecurity. And Ed, I believe, has the URL for that paper, and he'll put it into the chat window here for you. I really suggest reading it. What they did was they took a lot of different trends in cybersecurity, and they interviewed people on these trends. And full disclosure, I was one of the people that they interviewed. And then they took these trends and they started playing around with them and thinking, what would happen if those trends changed? If they changed in certain combinations? What would those scenarios look like? And I think they came out with something like 19 different scenarios, possible futures. Which reminds me, here are some things that Heather taught me that you need to know about the future and about futurists. They're not really people looking into crystal balls. As she says herself, you can't actually predict anything unless you absolutely control it. So, excuse me, you cannot predict the future. It's also not just one future. We are used to having one past and one present, but we don't have one future. We have many possibilities of futures. And even if you're pretty sure you know what's going to happen, You don't know when it is going to happen. This is why it's a bad idea to try to time the stock market, because even if you control some event in there, which you know you're not supposed to do, you don't know exactly when something is going to happen. So what you do is, again, you look at different trends and then you try to forecast how many different ways that they could go. And of course, you have to put a lot of research and knowledge behind them, but you really don't know where things are going to happen. The trends can be in many different areas. We're used to thinking of technological trends, Moore's law, or even as Josh Corman puts it, H.D. Moore's law. But there are a lot of different other areas of trends. There are social trends, demographics as generations age, lifestyle changes, education changes, health. Hello, who thought that we would be in the position that we are in now? Even if people had planned for pandemics, and there are people who do that, nobody knew exactly when it was going to happen. And now that has upended a lot of what we are doing in cybersecurity because of a health trend. So this is why it's important to look at non-technology trends as well as the technology ones. There are economic trends, as we know. There's growth and stagnation in different areas, different markets. There's environmental change. There are political changes, of course, all the time, and those definitely affect the cybersecurity industry and the conditions that we're dealing with. And our values. How do we feel about things in cybersecurity? For example, if we decided that individual developers were personally liable for the results of bugs that they put in their code, if we decided that you could sue an individual developer for a mistake that they made, that would really change technology as we know it today. So what you want to do when you are trying to forecast the future is you identify the constants that we take for granted, and then you reverse them to identify potential disruption. If you are a chip maker, for example, what if it was hard to get a hold of sand? What if we ran out of sand? I'm not saying we will, but this is something that we take for granted, and just what if? Something that we needed in manufacturing was suddenly no longer available or very difficult to procure. One of the other trends that we have always relied on without thinking about it is the idea that we can be physically near each other. And that has shown up in so many of our security policies. At the help desk, if somebody's calling on an internal line through a PBX, you're pretty sure that they're an insider because of where they're calling from, or they walked over to the help desk, so you assume that they're an employee. How do you verify an employee if nobody's in the office anymore? We used to think that shared fingerprint readers for biometrics were just fine. We never thought about them until suddenly it became unsanitary for everybody to be touching the same fingerprint reader without gloves on. Here are all the constants that we need to think about and reverse to see if we are prepared for them to be reversed. But Heather warns us, don't try to predict what form the disruption will take. Just think about those assumptions, think about disruption, try to prepare for them, but don't try to predict, because then you're making more assumptions. You're kind of digging yourself into a hole. Now, who here has heard that Wayne Gretzky quote that everybody loves? Oh, I don't skate to where the puck is, I skate to where the puck will be in hockey. You know what? I hate this. I hate this saying, because it's easy enough to do when the puck has only been hit once. Try predicting where the puck is going to be 10 minutes from now. Try predicting where it's going to be 30 minutes into the hockey game. That's a little bit harder. You can be kind of sure that the puck is going to be somewhere in the hockey rink, but other than that, you don't know where it's going to be. This is how difficult it is to predict the future. But we can play with our assumptions. So let's do that. What if we didn't need to care where the puck will be. Let's throw out that assumption. What if we don't need to care? How would we not need to care? Well, today in hockey, all the players play different roles. What if we made them all goalies? What if we put them all in front of the goal? Then we wouldn't have to care where the puck is anymore because nobody could get the puck through. But on the other hand, you're not going to score any points either. And that's part of the game. So, okay, that's not the best solution. But it's an example of taking our assumptions, flipping them over and saying, let's play with this and see if we can disrupt what we've always taken for granted. So if we're trying to be ready for the future, what you try to do is you pick the future that you would like to see, and then you try to backcast it, which is the opposite of forecasting. You try to backcast it. You try to reverse engineer the trends and conditions that need to be in place for that future that you would like to see happen. And then you try to put those trends in motion. You try to activate those. And again, unless you control them absolutely, you probably can't do it completely. But if you kind of know where you're trying to herd things, you might be able to do it. Bear in mind, again, that the solution might not necessarily be technology. So think about the future that you would like and what it would take to get there, what events. Here's an example of what you could do to play with time and get ahead of it, to use it to your advantage. I don't know if you saw that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation announced that they're going to fund the manufacture of 7 vaccine candidates in parallel. They're going to build 7 separate factories, each one to manufacture a different vaccine, in the hope that at least one of them will pan out and turn out to be a viable vaccine. By that point, they will have saved all the time of spinning up a factory and the production and everything. They'll be ready to go directly into vaccine production as soon as they know that that vaccine is the one. But if one of them pans out and the other 6 don't, then those 6 factories will have been wasted time and effort and money. But they're okay with that because they feel it is so important to save time on the front end to be ready to identify a vaccine candidate and put it in production for billions of people around the world. Now, if you're really rich, you can afford to do that. You can throw money away on a bunch of alternative solutions that you know may not pan out. Think about this in terms of cybersecurity. Are there things that you can do in parallel that won't cost too much, that you'd be willing to throw away, knowing that they didn't work, all in the effort to come up with something that does work? Think about that, because working in parallel is something that we can do very well as a community if we work together. And in terms of coming up with a solution, do you want precision or do you want accuracy? A lot of people think that these are the same, and they're really not. If you look at this example here of this target right here, wow, somebody's jumping in. If you look at this example of accuracy, you can see that the 3 holes or the 3 shots are all on the target. But they're not really close together. They're not precise, but they're in the general ballpark. They're accurate in that they're where you want them to be. When you look at the precision, all of those shots are very close together. They kept hitting the same place over and over again. That's nice and precise, but it's not on the board. So do you want to be more or less accurate, or do you want to be very precise and run the risk of being wrong? Do you want to be wrong to 7 decimal places? Because you can do that. That's precision. Or are you going to decide that accuracy is good enough, even if it's not very precise? The other question is, are you trying to solve a problem in cybersecurity, or are you trying to capture a market? I used to ask this a lot when I was an industry analyst, when I worked with security vendors. Are you trying to solve a specific problem? If so, that's great. You can keep focusing on that problem. For example, at Duo, we have been trying to solve the problem of making MFA easier and more widespread. And we're still doing that. We're still focusing on working on that. If you're trying to capture a market, like a detection market or something like that, you're going to have to look at what your competitors are doing. You're going to have to pivot every time they come up with something new. Well, they came out with this, so I guess we should do that too, because otherwise we're going to lose market share to them. If you're pivoting all the time, you're not going to make a whole lot of progress. So think carefully about the problem or the opportunity that you're chasing in cybersecurity and trying to figure out which one is it. If you're trying to solve a specific problem, keep working on that problem. So in order to plan better, what we want to do is reverse our assumptions and look beyond technology as the leading trends that we need to pay attention to and perhaps influence if we can. We want to maximize our own flexibility so that we can react in midstream, because we know that whatever we're doing is going to take a lot of time. We don't want to waste time, but on the other hand, we want to be able to keep our eye on the ball. We need to know what we are trying to do and not be distracted too much by all these fads that are coming out. At the same time, be ready to hedge your bets. Again, when you have these many different time horizons in cybersecurity, you know that you are going on a long-term journey, and you don't necessarily know what budget you're going to have next year or what's going to happen that you absolutely did not predict. So hedge your bets. A few final thoughts. Heather points out that the problems we're dealing with today were created by solutions in our past. Somebody said, you know, I think it would be a great idea if one computer could send a message to another one. Instead of typing a memo, I'd like to be able to send it on a computer, from my computer to my friend's computer, instead of sending a piece of paper. Wouldn't that be cool? Now we have email. Enough said. We have so much email. The problems that we are dealing with today were caused by the solutions that we came up with decades ago. So if we are trying to solve problems today, what new problems are we going to create for our future? Because you know we're going to be doing some, and we can't necessarily foresee them. This is why it's really important for us to talk about and document the assumptions that we're making today. If you look at practices as a CISO, and you're looking at anything from a firewall rule to a procurement process and going, what idiot thought of this? The answer is always that there was a good idea at the time, there were certain conditions in place, and somebody made the best decision that they could at the time. Maybe it's not a great solution anymore, but it was a good idea at that time. So think about the time horizon when you are planning for cybersecurity. Document what your assumptions are today, what the conditions are today, why you are doing the things that you are, and save them, because your colleagues in the future and your future self is really going to thank you. Most important of all, we need to document them for each other. We need to discuss these things, because with a lot of these cybersecurity challenges, the best way that we're going to solve them is together. Let's create the future together. Thank you.
Wow, Wendy, as always, a lot of food for thought.
Did I just blow your mind, Ed?
Yes, you always do, and that's why I always love listening to you. This is fantastic. If Charles has any questions, you're connected here. Fantastic. I do have a question for you in one of your slides about threat intelligence sharing. I know that that's something that you've been espousing for a while, right? Because in the first Tactical Edge in Bogota, when we had the CISO summit meeting there with some CISOs, you said to them, set up groups, get together, exchange information. I can't believe that 5 years later, we're still saying the same message. So how does that get accomplished, Wendy, that we can share information?
Well, we can. I mean, there are CISO clubs. I happen to know that in Colombia and around the world, there are groups of CISOs that are sharing these things. I have a whole other talk about why it's difficult to share as much as we would like to. And I know there are going to be people who are talking about this, in more detail at this conference. I think it's just important to keep emphasizing that the more we know and the more we share, the tougher we make it for the attacker. And that there are some types of IOCs that lend themselves very well to automation, and we get seduced into wanting to share those machine readable indicators of compromise because they're easy and they're automatable. But people like David Bianco argue that they're not necessarily useful. Just because you can send a bunch of hashes, thousands a minute, doesn't mean that somebody else can do anything with them or that they're meaningful. That they're slowing the attacker down by the act of sharing them. So we really have to be able to share the things that are meaningful. And those tend to be the things that also reveal the inner workings of an organization, which is why CISOs aren't always allowed to share those. The best threat intelligence is a story. Like, we saw this, they happened to get through this control. We tried this, and then they reacted by doing this. And then we saw this, and then we also tried this. And those are great. Those are gold. But the problem is, if you don't know and trust the people you're sharing it with, you're not going to share that much about what happened, and especially the mistakes that you made. So that's the problem.
And that leads to the next question that I had. When you had reverse your assumptions, right? And the way that I understood that statement or that sentiment was about focus mostly on tools, right? Because a lot of us rely a lot on tools to do certain things. Mm-hmm. And you gave a perfect example, which I never considered, the fingerprint reader.
Right? We have run into this because we do multi-factor authentication with biometrics, and we're big in healthcare. So we went, oh my God, you're right. We're now running into the fact that this is not sanitary.
Yeah. So again, as a CISO, that was a great decision a few years ago.
Yeah.
Something happened, and now it's no longer the same decision. How do you as a CISO then go back and say, you know what? Sorry that we spent so much money on that. Let me rethink this, and I think that this is a better solution. It's very tricky.
It's very tricky. And you know what, as soon as we discovered this, my first thought was, okay, then everybody gets their own fingerprint reader, which is,
Okay.
right here. Okay,
right.
We're going to switch to phone. Everybody use your own phone. Then you don't have to worry about spreading germs. But, we have to deal with this with Face ID and people wearing masks. This is why, above all, CISOs have to be flexible, because you never know what suddenly is going to stop working in your environment. And, if you're used to scanning all your endpoints and now everybody's at home and you can't scan them because ISPs see those vulnerability scans as attacks and they block them, then you can't use your usual vulnerability scanning process anymore. You've got to be able to react. And that's why, at least thinking about these assumptions, even if you can't do anything about them right now, just knowing that they're there will help you prepare mentally to be more flexible.
Yeah, and so again, reverse your assumptions. That reminded me of an article I read a long time ago about chess masters. How chess masters, they never think a step ahead. They actually visualize the end result, as you mentioned, that the visionary said, and then take a step back. How do I get to that? And then take a step back. How do I get to that? how do you start visualizing that? I mean, are there any any recommendations? How do we start as CISOs, start from the end product, what we want to see, and then take a step back? It's very difficult.
It is really difficult, and it's terrible. When I worked for the state of Texas, we had to plan our budgets out as much as 5 years ahead of time. Nobody has any idea what's going to happen in 5 years. The most you can do is think about functionality. What do we want to be able to do as CISOs, as security professionals? And what do we need in place to be able to do it regardless of what happens around us? Because we don't know what the business is going to do. We don't know what trends we're going to have. We don't know what budgets we're going to have. So you pick, the things that you can control, and you say, we have no idea what tools we're going to be able to use 2 years from now, but we do know that we're going to need people to run them. So we are going to focus on training, retaining, recruiting, the best people we can. We're going to start a recruiting pipeline now, even though we don't have any open positions, but we're going to start identifying really smart people from different walks of life in case we need somebody who was a biology major because it's suddenly very relevant to what we're doing.
Okay.
You can think in those terms. But what you can't do is just put everything on the blockchain. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. No, we get that point. Is that then what you mean about look beyond technology? Doing that training. It's a lot of psychology, a lot of people, skills basically to help them rethink and see things differently.
Yeah, I mean. If you're sitting there and as a security professional and trying to figure out what is going to happen in 2 years and what the business is going to do and how you're going to react to it from a security point of view, maybe you could reverse your assumptions and say, maybe it's not my job to figure this out. I'm going to go sit down with the business and say, when the time comes when you have to do this, part of your job is going to figure out how to secure it. And I'll be here. I'll help you. But just so you know, as soon as you get that gleam in your eye, you're going to have to start thinking about security. So, again, that's a reversal of assumptions that possibly you can work with. One of the scenarios that Heather Vesson and Bob Blakely came up with in their paper was what they called the Iron Man scenario, which is where every consumer has their own security baked in to their devices, and they are their own protector. You don't need to educate them anymore. They know how to use all their stuff. They know, so you don't have to do education. Can you imagine throwing out security awareness training and saying, we don't have to do this anymore? But it could be a disruption if we designed security well enough that everybody was automatically secure in their own devices. That would be the future that we're in. So it's interesting to play around with these scenarios and think about how that would change what we would do as security professionals if those trends came true, if we stopped believing in education, if we stopped deciding that it was the user's responsibility to be secure and just built security in so they couldn't help it. They couldn't help being secure. Wow. What would happen if we threw that assumption out?
Wow. That's that's a lot to think about, and a lot for the companies and manufacturers to start thinking about. But then again, it brings the question, and I know we're running out of time, but the latest news about is Snapdragon. Is that the name of the chip that all Android devices are based on? That there's a fault in the design, and now every Android device is susceptible to a vulnerability, and it came like that from the manufacturer, from the developer, and it's like, pretty sure they pay a lot of attention to security, and there's always humans involved, so you're going to have the chance of something escaping, a bug being there. So it's very difficult to play with all this because nothing can be secure from the get-go, and we all know this.
Yeah, we know this. So what if it didn't matter that Snapdragon had a flaw in it because we had so many other mitigations? We weren't going to trust that chip anyway.
Okay.
You
see
know,
where you're going.
I don't know. Let's play with that too.
Okay, I see where you're going. Well, wow, Wendy, as always, thank you very, very much. Really appreciate it. Oh, before I forget, somebody said that there's a strong hot game, and I forgot. I didn't get the memo.
Yeah, there you
So
go.
I got my
Get your hat going.
Liverpool Football Club, current champions of the Premier League. Yay! Very happy about that. So Wendy,
Nice.
thank you
Thank
so
you
much for being
so
with us.
much.
Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, all right. And
Thank
Charles,
you.
we haven't forgotten you. Thank you so much for being here and baptizing today Tactical Tuesday. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, buddy. We'll talk later.
All right.
Thank you,
Hey.
Charles.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks, man.
Bye.
Salma,